As the world witnesses the recent ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas brokered by the Trump administration, expectations are high, but so are the uncertainties surrounding its potential impact. Well, joining me in the studio is Professor Scott Lucas, a Middle Eastern expert at the Clinton Institute at University College Dublin, to explore what this deal means. Hi, Professor Lucas. Thanks so much for joining me.
Linda, thank you so much for letting me in to have a chat.
This is quite a big moment. Can we start with an overview of the main components of the ceasefire deal?
It's a big moment, Linda, but it's only the start of a process which will tell us how big the moment is. Here's where we are to start off with as we speak, which is late Thursday afternoon. At the start of today, Donald Trump announced that Hamas and the Netanyahu government had agreed a phase one ceasefire deal. Now, as usual, Donald Trump jumped the gun just a bit. Hamas has agreed in principle to an exchange of the remaining 20 Israeli hostages and the 28 bodies held since October 2023 in return for around 2,000 Palestinian detainees held in Israeli prisons. But they've only agreed in principle because we still await the formal outcome of the Israeli cabinet meeting, which is taking place as you and I speak. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said he supports the agreement. He has a couple of far-right ministers who oppose it. The finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, the internal security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, but they're not expected, he's expected to win the vote, and they are not expected to bring the government down over this. So what we have over the weekend is we need to confirm the names of the Palestinians who are being released. And this is no small matter because, for example, one of the Palestinians who has been held for more than 20 years by Israel is one of the national leaders of Palestine, Marwan Barghouti. This is someone who, in principle, could become a leader of a state of Palestine. And the Israelis are holding out against releasing now. So does that provide it? I don't think it'll be a breaking point, but it's something to watch. But let's assume this goes forward. Let's hope it goes forward because for the sake of the hostages, their families in Israel, the detainees, their families in Gaza, and for all of Gaza's civilians, by Monday, we could have the exchange and we could have the ceasefire with a halt to Israeli military operations. But I said it's only the start because we really are only back at that point to where we were in January of this year when we did get a 60-day ceasefire and it was a phase one ceasefire. The difference here is that only some of the hostages were released back then. But what happened with that phase one ceasefire, which is instructive, is that it fell apart at the end of the phase one. And it fell apart, to be honest with you, because the Netanyahu government didn't want to stop the attack against Hamas. And so at the start of March, they resumed military operations. They cut off almost all aid into the Strip. And for several months, the Trump administration effectively gave them a blank check to do so. So, this idea that Trump has been pushing for peace all along, even with the Nobel Peace Prize, no, that's really been very, very recent. The reason why we are where we are now, just to get to the start of the process, is because on September 9th, Netanyahu miscalculated. He overreached when he tried to assassinate the Hamas negotiators. Now, that actually probably would have been okay. At least it would have been accepted by a lot of folks, possibly including the Trump folks. But they tried to do it by attacking with an airstrike inside Qatar. And Qatar is an ally of the United States. It has the biggest American base in the Middle East. And Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is bankrolled by the Qataris and the Saudis for his investment firm. And they all stand to make quite a bit of money if there's a stable Gaza. So you had, after September 9th, you had the Gulf states in particular, but also Turkey, other Arab states going to the Trump folks and saying, look, you've got to put pressure on Netanyahu. Otherwise, we're going to have, expanded regional instability and it's all going to fall apart. And that brought this sudden developments that gets us to this. But it raises, and I don't want to be downbeat because any any ray of hope is a good hope. I don't want to be downbeat, but what it means is when we get to next week, we've got to watch multiple factors in terms of what are the issues and what is still a vague sketch. And the 20-point sketch of Donald Trump is a very vague sketch. It is vague about the extent of the Israeli withdrawal. What are the exact lines inside Gaza? And does it cover all of Israel's military, not only ceasing operations, but pulling back? What is the timing of Hamas's disarmament? Does Hamas have to give up all weapons, or can it retain defensive weapons, rifles, for example, for self-protection? What is the timing regarding the aid arrangements? Who will supervise the aid arrangements? Will the Israelis have a veto over any of the aid arrangements? What are the governance and security arrangements? The international board, which is to be headed by Donald Trump, or so he says, has no Palestinians on it. So how do you get Palestinian buy-in to this international board that's going to oversee the Strip? The International Stabilization Force. Who is providing troops to this International Stabilization Force? Will Palestinian units be allowed to be part of the Israeli state, or the International Stabilization Force, or will Israel veto that? And then the day-to-day administration of the Strip. Palestinians are supposed to be part of that. That is in the sketch. But we know Hamas will not be part of that, and Hamas has accepted that. Israel has said in the short term it does not want Palestinian Authority involved. So who are the Palestinian technocrats? Who are the Palestinian civil society activists who will be on this day-to-day administration? And will Israel have veto power over those Palestinians? All of that has got to be worked out. And the worry here is that, well, here's the worry. Everybody has to stay invested here. And because Hamas gave up its last leverage, and let's be, it's cynical, but it's true. The hostages were leverage for Hamas. They've given that up. They're going to demand guarantees. They're going to demand guarantees that the Israelis will fulfill their part of the bargain. So will Benjamin Netanyahu continue to withstand pressure from his far-right ministers, given that the finance minister, Mr. Smotrich, said today, as soon as the hostages are back, we are going to destroy Hamas? Will Netanyahu hold out against that? Will the Arab and the Gulf states in particular continue to be invested in putting, trying to influence both the Trump administration and Hamas? And maybe most importantly, after taking a victory lap this weekend, which he will do with a trip to Jerusalem, will Donald Trump remain invested in this next week? Because again, don't want to be downbeat, but Donald Trump was invested back in January in getting a phase 1 ceasefire because he could say, Joe Biden couldn't do this. Look, I could do this. When the Netanyahu government walked and didn't go to phase 2, Trump also walked, because you can remember that he started talking about displacing the Gazan population. So that's both the possibilities and the risk that we're looking at. In the rubber hits the road next week, to use a phrase my grandfather used to use all the time.
Well, when we look at the people in Gaza and the people in Israel, people were so happy about it. So is there any hope that it has elements of a lasting deal?
Oh, the pieces are there because the deal was actually on the table last year. This is something which has really just fully come out in the past few days because people started to look at it. Hamas had agreed to almost all the elements that are in the sketch last year. But this one, because not a huge fan of Donald Trump, as you could tell, but this is not on him. This is on the Biden administration, right? And that is the Biden administration would not exert pressure on Netanyahu to agree to the deal at that point. This went to the desk of Brett McGurk, who was Biden's Middle East envoy. And McGurk said, no, we're not going to go on those lines. We're going to go on a separate path. So it never came about. Netanyahu did not fulfill it. And then obviously when we had the phase 1 ceasefire, he walked on out. So the elements have been there for quite some time. But, saying that the elements are there and having the political will to carry them through, two very, very different things.
So what could recovery look like in Gaza? Because there have been these suggestions about the Riviera.
Yeah. So let's kick that to the curb real quick. I mean, look, that idea was a serious idea, by the way. And I need to emphasize to folks why I might remain skeptical with this. And that is that you had a academic, I think at one of the universities in Washington, D.C., who pitched this to a consulting firm, who took it to the Trump administration, which is, we'll build the condos, we'll build the resorts. And it all ties into what Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying. I can remember this for decades, where to avoid talking about a two-state resolution, he'll always talk about the economic redevelopment of the West Bank and Gaza. That's his shtick. So it kind of all fit in that you could, create this Rubio in the Middle East. And you might remember Trump even pitching a video which has a golden statue of him in the middle of it. But of course, it all premised on that a lot of the Gazans would be displaced. So let's kick that to the curb. That doesn't work. What you're talking about is you have to have recovery and reconstruction so that the day-to-day subsistence of Gazans is ensured. All right? So you now need to have buy-in from multiple actors, but you've got both a cynical approach to this, and then you've got a real-life approach to this that might be, all right, a combination of cynicism and what is possible. The cynical approach, which I did mention briefly, which is serious, is there are people who stand to make money from this. And I will go back to Jared Kushner has been instrumental in the final stage of these negotiations, but this is also the same Jared Kushner who launched a major investment firm back in 2022, and most of the money from it comes from Gulf states. Now, there is also a man named Ron Dermer, who you may have heard of, who until last week was the strategic affairs minister for Benjamin Netanyahu, and who was in Sharm el-Sheikh to seal the phase one deal this week. Guess who Ron Dermer is going to be working with starting next week? Jared Kushner, in Kushner's business. So there's the cynical side of this. Now, sometimes good things happen from cynicism and self-interest, including Trump winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And that's where I give you the real-life example. Surprise media hasn't paid attention to this, to be honest with you. We've actually got a real-life case of recovery and reconstruction going on next door in Syria, where in December 2024, the Assad regime was quickly toppled after almost 14 years of an uprising against it. And of course, you had this new government drawn from very, very different elements, including HTS, which actually at one point had been linked to Al-Qaeda. It's very different now. It's not Al-Qaeda, hasten to add that. But, you've got this new government of anti-Assad elements who now have to come in and govern, and they've got to try to provide some type of economic stability. And who are you getting the buy-in from that? Turkey. Huge amount of investment coming in from the Turks. That's for political influence as well as economic profit, and the Gulf states. And for those of you who want to go further back, because I used to work in Beirut, you can go back to what happened in Lebanon after the Civil War, from the 75 until the 1990s, and a lot of Gulf money flowed in there in the first few years of the 21st century. So a lot of money could flow into Gaza, but that money does not flow into Gaza until they have assurance of governance and until they have assurance of security. And so we're back to where we were, which is you got to flesh out the sketch and put it into place before you get the recovery and reconstruction being developed to a meaningful extent.
So what is the role of the regional players, Egypt and Qatar, to influence this peace process and keep it on track?
I mean, Egypt is there because in a way they're sort of, they have the peace agreement with Israel, going back to another phase of instability back in the 1970s, and because they've got the border with Gaza, they've got that immediate interest there. And it's also the fact that, everybody, if they get deals like this and they put this role in, everybody forgets their military junta, which basically took power in 2013, in what was not a very nice episode. Qatar has a key player here because Qatar quite often is the broker of discussions, the mediator. This is true of Afghanistan as well as been true with Iran. So here they are. And of course, they've got that U.S. military base, which is there. So there's that investment, that mutual investment that is there. But in this case, I think you've got to go beyond Qatar. You've got to go to Saudi. You've got to go to the UAE especially. And here you've got economic and political interest in play. and I'll add Turkey as well, quite often. Okay, where are the political interests in here? The political interest, the economic interest, sorry, we've discussed a bit. The political interests that work off the economic interest is that you've got the Gulf states who are maneuvering between the Trump administration, the region, and other possible alignments. They have been very unsettled because Trump is chaotic, he's unpredictable, but they want to pin him down. This is one way to try to pin him down, to get him invested in a deal. Trump's interest, or the Trump administration's interest, which gives the Gulf states leverage, is the Trump administration wants to move from this deal to so-called normalization. Now, the Abraham Accords and that whole process in Trump 1.0, which is you had Morocco, you had Bahrain, you had, trying to remember, I think if UAE, in fact, who recognized the state of Israel. And from that political normalization, then you get the broader economic links that are in play as well, right? The Trump folks would like that to come back on board because they've got economic links as well. They can profit from this, and it gives them good PR. So how do the Gulf states play that? The Gulf states cannot play that by coming in and siding with Hamas, and they don't want to side with Hamas. They don't like Hamas. They haven't liked Hamas. Hamas is a destabilizing force, including within their own countries. And that even includes Qatar, who has hosted the Hamas officials for many years as they try to play both sides, right? So the Gulf states can't do it openly. What they do is they can work behind the scenes. And that is the whole play here, which is they needed an opening. They needed an opening to finally to get the Trump folks to stop giving Netanyahu leeway to expand his attacks. They've got that now for the moment. Can they keep working it? Can they keep exploiting it? And the Turks as well, I'll add them into the mix. Turkey's a member of NATO. And Turkey's a member of NATO, which says we're increasing our defense spending. We're a reliable member of NATO. We are willing, in fact, we would love to take in and buy more of your fantastic jet fighters because they had been suspended. The U.S. had cut off supply of the jet fighters. So it's a mutual interest deal here that the Turks say to Trump, who always likes the idea that he's making money, we'll take all this military hardware. Turkey gets to bolster its defense forces, and it supports Erdogan's play here which is Erdogan wants to be seen as the big guy in the Middle East. Syria, where he's made his big play. He also wants to make his play here. And beyond this, he's also making his play, of course, let us not forget, with Azerbaijan and Armenia.
If the peace deal holds, do you think President Donald Trump would indeed deserve a Nobel Peace Prize?
I don't care, because Donald Trump's ego is not my priority. I mean, here's a bit of information which I don't think he's figured out yet. And I think it's true, but it may be a bit of spin from the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. They let it be known that their final deliberations were on Monday. So he don't get the Nobel Peace Prize this year because they've already made the decision. When he cottons on, I can't wait to see the True Social tweet. I'm going to kick it to the curb because I'm going to come back to you. I said it earlier and I'll repeat it. Sometimes out of cynicism, self-interest, ego, narcissism, good things can happen. Sometimes you have to play to ego, narcissism, and people's self-interest to make good things happen. And my focus here is on the civilians in Israel, in Gaza, in the West Bank, where there are still huge issues with the expansion of the illegal settlements and beyond. I want to continue to keep the focus there personally because the welfare of those civilians on both sides is important. Because here's the real sticking point that we have to get to. Even if we get phase one, even if we get extended phases where some of these arrangements that we talked about come into place, your landing point needs to be a two-state resolution. Now, more states have recognized this, and that has been another significant influence in the last few months that has been underestimated. At some point, the starting point for the discussions now has to be on the basis of that two-state resolution and not on the basis where it has been for Netanyahu for decades, which is, look, we'll talk about economic development, and we don't need to be talking about two states. In other words, goalposts have shifted here. You have got to keep your focus on the goalpost and say the two-state resolution is what provides lasting security and a decent way of life for people in both of those states. And you have got to support that process. And that means you have to go beyond Donald Trump's ego, because Donald Trump does not support the two-state resolution. His Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, does not support the two-state resolution. Not even Jared Kushner at this point, I think, supports two-state resolution because his interest is money. So it's going to be up to others to continue to put that pressure on. And that raises an interesting point, which almost everybody will miss today. I correct myself. A lot of people in the UK and in the US will miss it, but it's not being missed in the Middle East and Central Asia, because I was just asked about it by a Pakistani network. As we speak, not only is Benjamin Netanyahu discussing with his cabinet, will we accept this? They will. What happens? You have a meeting of European and Arab states convened by France, which is discussing some of the arrangements that we're talking about: governance, security, the path to a two-state resolution. The U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said he was going to attend that meeting. And then within hours, after Israel objected, he said, I got something else to do. So we are only at the start of the kaleidoscope. Let's hope that we can turn the kaleidoscope where the pieces align, that we get beyond that hostage for detainees deal, and eventually wind up where you get, and I just keep my fingers crossed and hope against hope, that we finally get the two states that the people of Israel and of Palestine deserve.
So how many hostages are actually left?
20 are alive. 20 are alive. So there's been Israeli intelligence has been monitoring, of course, and I suspect there's been communication, quiet communication, as happens even in war between Hamas and the Israelis, to say, yeah, we've got 20 who are there, 28 bodies. Hamas let it be known that there may be issues with collecting all of those bodies, right? And there's also issues, by the way, not all of the hostages are held by Hamas. There are smaller groups who are part of, the Gazan military forces, such as Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ. So you have to, that's why we don't get that release until Monday. All of that has got to be coordinated. But yeah, we've got 20 lives who hopefully will be saved because of this. We've got thousands who will be released, and hopefully we'll have a better way of life in Gaza. And then how many thousands who could be spared if we finally get a halt to the assaults and we get a resumption of aid. And that's what I'm holding on to.
Wow, Professor Scott Lucas, that's fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank all of your great listeners.